Okay, I'm going to call to order the City of Burlington Board of Finance meeting on Monday, May 12th, 2025. It's 5:03 p.m. Our first item is our agenda. Is there a motion on the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda.
Moved by Councilor Barlow. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Travers. Any discussion on the agenda before we call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Our first item is public forum. This is a chance for members of the public to address the Board of Finance. And first is our practice to go in person in the room and then online for members of the public. And depending how many folks we have, we'll keep public comment similar to the public comment rules upstairs for City Council about 2 minutes. So first, is anyone in the room who'd like to address Board of Finance? Come on up and introduce yourself.
Dan Butzier, and I have worked for the City of Burlington for 43 years. And it was extremely humiliating the way that I was let go on Thursday. Particularly since it came at no cost savings to the City of Burlington, since I plan to retire at the end of July, sometime maybe in August. And it was just very hurtful, disrespectful, beyond anything I could fathom. I started here when Bernie got hired and created the youth center. And I have worked hard all the way through to get where I am. And then I finally get to retirement. And honestly, I was going to retire in May when I turned 60, but I realized it was fiscal year end, and I said, I can't do that to the city, so I will stay through because I care more about my job, and I wouldn't do that to them. Only last week to be told, hand in your stuff, you're done, you're going immediately. And it's just heart-wrenching. Like, there's nothing that the budget would have saved. I would have given back more than what they would have saved by turning over the finances to the next. I know it was getting merged with the clerk treasurer's office, and I could have handed that over instead of leaving everything unorganized, no files turned over, no transition. And they've known for several months that I was retiring. And it's just not right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon or evening, Board of Finance. My name is Jesse Bridges. I am a former director of the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront, and I'm here at Board of Finance, not at City Council's public forum, because I'm not here to grandstand or question the tough decisions that are ahead of you. The fact that you have to make cuts is obvious and necessary, and layoffs are largely going to be a part of that. What I can't seem to understand is the way in which the city went about making these cuts, making these notifications, as you heard from Joanne and many others, who were unceremoniously walked out of the building like they had committed fraud, like they were somehow perpetrators of criminal activity, when in fact they were people that picked up kids in the Old North End and drove them to flag football, showed up early to let the power soccer players into the Miller Center, made sure that little kids had skating lessons, and made sure that kids that couldn't afford to go to any other camp had summer camp every week. These are people that gave their lives to the city day in and day out, that sacrificed late nights, weekends with their own families to make sure that families in Burlington had a better quality of life. And it is unconscionable to me that this administration would treat people with this much lack of respect. It is against everything I thought this administration was going to stand for. I get that you have to make tough decisions, but you don't have to treat people the way that they were just treated. You have to support the people who do the work as much as the work itself. And while it's going to impact these individuals, the number of individuals, not just in the Department of Parks, Recreation and Waterfront, but in the rest of the departments that were impacted a lot, it is going to crush the morale and the culture of this organization moving forward. And if you're going to try and get all this hard work done and you want to have people moving alongside you, I can guarantee you that employees are not going to rally to the cause if this is how they're going to be treated. I came into a department that was in disarray. I came into a department that felt beleaguered and belittled. And we as a team worked together to repair that. And I am just deeply saddened today to see that fractured, to see the community center in the Old North End shuttered. It's just a real lack of compassion that I'm frankly I can't really put my arms around why it was handled in the way it was handled. Whether or not those decisions needed to be made, that's a debate for council and the administration, and I completely understand. I've had to let people go. I've had to close programs. I've done it. It is not easy. I don't envy any of you having to make these decisions. But do better for the people and do better for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Anyone else in person like to address the Board of Finance?
My name is Melissa Kate. Until last Thursday, I was the division director for the Recreation Facilities Division of Burlington Parks, Recreation and Waterfront. Obviously, this is a crushing decision for myself and my co-workers who are impacted. However, I question how the selections were made. Unfortunately, we're finding out that a lot of the employees who were terminated are over the age of 50, over the age of 60, in a disproportionate number. And that smacks of ageism in my mind. 2 of the 8 people in our department who were let go also are BIPOC citizens. That's a little troublesome from a progressive leadership. I'd also question why, with 37 new positions with one-time funding sources, those were not the ones that are eliminated. In the nonprofit sector, if somebody is hired with a grant, with grant funding, and that grant ends, the position ends, but that was not the case in the city. Certainly Parks and Rec added many positions over the last 10 years. And it feels like those, perhaps, and other ones in the city that were new or were one-time funded should be the ones that were scrutinized more carefully. And still, we're getting, even today, new positions posted in the city, which is a slap in the face to those of us who were terminated as well. Like Jesse said, I hope somehow you can do better moving forward and rebuild our. That those of us who left have loved and worked for. I've been with the city for 30 years. Between Joanne and I and our one other manager who was terminated, we have 100 years of experience. And that's pretty disappointing.
Anyone else in the room that wish to address the Board of Finance public forum? Seeing none? So online, does anyone online wish to address the Board of Finance? City Councilor Chairman Sean. Okay. Just checking. Okay. Seeing no further public forum, I will close public forum and we'll move on to our consent agenda. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated.
Moved by Councilor Travers. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Weezer. Is there any discussion on the motion before we vote? Let's note that we have an exciting partnership at item 3.3 with members from the Eagle Bay Academy, which is part of the Burlington School District. And just wanted to bring people's attention to that item on the agenda. It's our continued work to collaborate around public art and graffiti remediation. So I just wanted to bring attention to those on to the break. So any further discussion? Councilor Travers?
I'll just echo those snacks, Mayor, I know we can't really get into debate on the issue, but I think it's on consent for a reason. I'm excited by the partnership that your administration has brought to us, particularly I've been in touch with Deputy Chief of Staff, Joe McGee, as well as our partners at Eagle Bay Academy. And I'm excited this is on there. I'm excited about the impact it will have on the South End.
Ward 5.
Yes.
Yes. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nay, any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving to our deliberative agenda, our first item is item 4.1, extension of the letter of agreement between the City of Burlington and the University of Vermont. And our CAO, Catherine Shad, will kick us off on this item.
Yes,
Pass it over to you.
thank you. I'm also joined by Assistant City Attorney Eric Ramakrishnan, who is online. And this item is coming before you tonight as one that was originally brought before this body in 2019. This is a extension of one of our agreements, one of the city's agreements with UVM. This is the agreement that we refer to as the pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. It's also referred to as the omnibus payment. And that is because we think of UVM as paying the city one amount of money in exchange or in replacement for not having to pay property taxes. But in reality, they pay a couple of different amounts. One is a separate amount for the 10-year capital plan. And one is a separate amount for University Health Center. The Degausse-Briand unit is also called. But this main agreement stems from a letter that was signed between the city and UVM in 2019, and that covered the time period of 2018 to 2022. In that initial agreement, there was an opt-in for UVM to have a 3-year renewal clause. They exercised that, and that would bring us up to June 30th of 2025. As UVM recently had a new president, it is our wish and theirs to extend this agreement under the current terms, which has a 2% per year escalation, to allow for thoughtful negotiations to occur, including the Board of Finance. And with that, Eric, is there anything you would like to add before I open it up to the board for questions?
The only thing I'll add is I try to call this the fee-for-service agreement because there is a separate statutory pilot that the university is required to pay. So that's an additional fee in addition to the ones that Catherine mentioned. I just throw that in for information and context.
Excellent, thank you. It's a lot to keep track of.
You ready for questions?
Yes, I
Discussion?
think we're ready for
So
questions.
questions or discussion from the Board of Finance? Councilor Barlow.
Thank you. And just to clarify, and I think Attorney Ramakrishnan may have helped me to understand it better. This is not the pilot money that the state pays for state buildings in the UVM campus every year. This is pilot, though. It sounds like it is pilot for Degausse-Briand. And then additionally, the portfolio of services that the city provides to, is that accurate?
That's right. Sorry.
But there is a separate amount in addition to what is listed here for Degausse-Briand, yes.
Okay.
That pilot was the settlement of a disagreement between the parties several years ago about its tax exempt status.
Thank you, that I understand.
Councilor Carpenter. iPads have funny mute buttons.
Can you, for my information, tell me how much the other pilot agreement is from the state? More or less.
Yes, but not off the top of my head of how much it is including for the state. Yes, I mean, I'm including for UVM. Yep, just give me a minute and I can look that up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any further comments or questions, Councilor Carpenter?
No, I just was trying to get a sense of the total amount that we get from the university.
Further discussion? Councilor Travers?
Yeah, so I appreciate the change in administration at UVM. And the need to get their sort of feet underneath them on this and related items. And so I will be supporting this item before the Board of Finance. I am anticipating that there may be some additional questions that are raised before the full council. I can tell you that I've had some discussions with some of our council colleagues, specifically around the question of the 2% inflationary rate that is baked in there from FY21. I think that was more in alignment with what we understood inflation to be for some time leading up to FY21, but of course, inflation has done a different thing in the few years since then. And questions around whether or not, notwithstanding our understanding the new administration at UVM needing to again get their feet underneath them, whether or not there is any opportunity here to discuss that particular issue. And the fact that we've stayed at a 2% inflationary rate year over year over year. Costs of our doing business as a city have certainly not gone up by 2%, they've gone up significantly more than that. And if there's an opportunity for us to keep up the pace in a better way on that end. And so I think a couple questions, right? One would be, when we speak about it in this space, I defer to you because I know this is going to be on the deliberative for council too. If there is any room from your perspective to discuss with UVM the issue of the inflationary adjustment. And then I think a second question may be whether extending it a full year is necessary, giving the administration at UVM some space here. Is it going to, from the administration's perspective, take a full year to get up to speed, or if the agreement was renewed? I don't even know, again, to confirm if this is permitted under the agreement for some time, less than 1 year, would that provide us additional opportunity for us to look at some of these items?
I will offer some brief answers, and then I'm sure this will be asked upstairs, as you said, Councilor Travers. So to the first piece, this agreement came together as a rollover when we realized that the current interim president was not going to be the permanent president selected, and we had been working diligently with that relationship over these last several months. Our President Prelog has been the interim president. So this was an attempt to make sure we didn't have an expired agreement, and then not be they're not subject to have to pay anything as of June 30th. So it was a short term, make sure that we at least extend for a year. One thing that I have seen walking into the role of mayor is that these negotiations with large institutions take time. We prioritized the UVM Medical Center MOU first, and that took a number of months from our leadership side in terms of briefing and updating, and then making room for some more additional input into what wasn't in the draft MOU when we walked in. And so it takes some time to go back and forth, and and that's in part my answer to full year extension or shorter. I would say that we would get into negotiation within the next 6 months with the new president and administration up on the Hill, and take those months to make sure we have a good, thoughtful agreement in place before June 30th of 2026. And also engage the council about what else, because I know there's other conversations that folks are curious about, other additional things that might expand the scope of this particular agreement. traditionally, or at least historically, it's really focused on police and fire services. It sort of gives a catch-all for other things. A lot has grown in terms of the needs of the city. We talked about this with the Union Medical Center MOU with the reservoir, for example, which serves everything at the top of the hill, not just the medical center, of course. So I think there's a lot of room for us to get ready and organize and start to have more in-depth conversations with the university when the new president begins in July. If we did 6 months, again, I would have the same concern about it expiring us not having something ready in place, and us not giving ourselves enough runway, especially if we want to look more in depth about the scope of this particular agreement.
Thank you for that feedback. Again, I anticipate there will be questions in alignment with that, but I appreciate that feedback.
Other comments or questions? Councilor Carpenter?
Somewhat in the same vein, I mean, I will be supportive, but I really think it would be helpful as early as we can to get more information on the data that this is based on. You know, how did we get to that figure? What's the utilization of the University of City Services? A lot of us don't understand it, and to be honest, don't feel perhaps it has been shared with us. So I would just ask that going into next year, we get that. The other conversation, which is not the discussion tonight, is, you know, as a city, how do we look at the pilot agreements coming from the state? I understand that the UVM pilot is capped in some fashion. Don't quite understand what's behind that. And understanding, as you well know, Mayor, the legislature is, I think we need to dig into that early, very early, and understand, you know, why is our pilot with the state capped, and how does that formula work relative to Burlington values?
I can explain there's a statutory pilot. So state correctional facilities and state educational facilities pay a payment in lieu of taxes to local communities. I forget what the correctional facility is based on, but for educational facilities, it's based upon the insured value of the building. So there's no land value. And the state calculates that amount and tells us how much we're due and sends the check. There's no agreement there. It's all per statute, and we don't administer that. So that we don't have control over that.
And I appreciate that. We don't have control under the current statute. And that's why I was hoping we could get some more detail on, you know, is that a realistic way to be looking at it? I clearly understand it would be a statutory change. I just think while we're having this conversation, we should look at that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Carpenter. And I do think that when we look to negotiate the next agreement, it makes absolute sense to look at attaching CPI or some sort of inflator in terms of an agreement, especially if it's a multi-year agreement, considering we cannot predict, especially in these next 3 years, what is going to happen in our economy. Further comments or questions on this item? Is anyone ready to make a motion?
I move to approve and recommend that the city council approve a 1-year extension to the letter of agreement between the city of Burlington and the University of Vermont, dated June 24th, 2019.
Thank you, Councilor Rallo. Is there a second? Councilor Newuser, second? Second by Councilor Newuser, thank you. Any further discussion on this item before we vote?
It's just one follow-up question, perhaps a question in anticipation of additional discussion before the council again, which is if I think a number of councilors sort of learned about this agreement for the first time when it was posted on the agenda on Thursday, which understandable. But to the extent, in consideration of any additional information they learned tonight, they needed another week to think further about it. I'm wondering from the administration's perspective whether or not a postponement of a week would in any way negatively impact conversations that we've had with the university. And you don't necessarily need to answer that now, but in the event it were to come up in this evening's meeting, something to consider.
Thank Thanks for that. Any further discussion before I call the question? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. On to our last deliberative item, which is item 4.2, a update on fiscal year 26 budget. This is not an item we have any recommended action on. It's an information presentation by the CAO and myself. We also are presenting this in more depth upstairs. So I think what Catherine and I are planning to do is a sort of an abbreviated version for folks here tonight. And I'm going to kick it off to just give some context of what the work is that we've gotten us here today. And I also just want to start first with just acknowledging how hard it has been this last week within the city. This has been the hardest moment of being mayor. I walked into a structural budget challenge within how the city of Burlington raises money, how it decided to spend money in the last 10 plus years. It's an incredibly difficult position to walk into as a brand new mayor last year with a $14 million gap. And then this year, knowing that we will continue to have structural budget gaps, and this year's budget gap is estimated to be $8 million. We had a lot more tools at our disposal last year, and we did not have a single layoff, which we worked really hard and I was very proud about, because that would have been very hard on the workforce to come in 6 weeks as a new mayor and then suddenly have to make fast choices with no deliberative process. We made it, one of our solutions last year was holding frozen vacancies that happened to be open in May, but there was no strategy about those positions, impacted departments. It was the only option we had at that moment to help plug again the $14 million gap. We had a lot of other one-time funds we were able to move around as CEO talks about the porters on the couch. We were able to kind of move money to plug holes. That has been the habit of this city for many years now, in terms of both using one-time funds, but also growing the city in an unsustainable way. Folks might have heard me talk about this before, but 98 positions have been added over the last 9 years that are reliant on general fund dollars, because no other money was allocated or found or identified for positions that were started when they had one-time funds attached. Folks in public comment mentioned the 37 positions. Those positions include things like CSOs, community safety officers, community safety liaisons within the Burlington Police Department. They were originally going to be funded by one-time funds or repurposing money for officers. It also includes money for racial equity, inclusion, and belonging work. These are two examples I offer because when we looked at all of the general fund departments and tried to be fair and reflective of what our current priorities are and needs in the city, there were hard decisions no matter what. But we know we have community safety issues in our community. We also know we have issues related to needing to double down and commit to equity and inclusion work. And we right-size those departments, and we are attempting to right-size the number of CSOs and CSLs to meet the needs of today in Burlington. So we did this as fairly as possible, looking again at the core services. It is hard no matter how you cut it, but we should try to really provide that assessment through a service inventory, and then another initiative called the Modern Gov Initiative to look at efficiencies that we can across the board, where we can centralize financial services, for example, and where we could close that gap, because unfortunately, we were out of a lot of options by the time we were planning this budget, and we had to start looking at staffing, which is one of the largest liabilities, if you will, for the general fund in terms of our expenses. I also very much want to make sure we treated as many employees and all of the employees as fairly as possible, both with those who would remain. I did not want to reach into union contracts and reopen them and claw back benefits. I did not want to do a pay cut across the board to everyone involved. This is, people work hard for the city of Burlington, and I wanted to make sure our jobs did not become weakened. And despite all the pressures on our health insurance and the cost of everything going up, that was a very important piece of this. And on the other side of that, for those who are impacted by the layoffs, we try to offer as generous of a severance as possible, following what the union requires for the ASME positions that were impacted. We extended that to all non-union employees. That was not an obligation we had to do, but we made sure, as I shared at a press conference today, 60 days fully paid by salary, health insurance all the way to the end of July, accrued paid leave beyond that, assistance with job counseling and cycling into other positions within the city, unemployment support and information as necessary. We try to hold that with as much care as possible. I'm not here to say we did everything perfectly, but I am also here to say that the city has no RIF policy. No procedure or policy existed within the city. This is a large institution with 700 employees to be responsible for, and I'm grateful for the union contract, actually, he's here today. And I'm grateful that we were able to use the roadmap within the union contract a little bit, but the city has not developed a very important piece of a roadmap really necessary for guiding good, responsible leadership decisions. So we were having to build this while we were moving through it, and that is not ideal for anyone involved. But I commit as a mayor that I will lead the city better than I found it in terms of processes, clarity, in ways that employees can know that how the city must act when we go through tough times. And I hope we're far away from really tough times like this again, because we're on a road of putting us towards a more sustainable approach for how we put our budget together. Some of the reasons around this are going to take a couple years to tackle because our charter is very outdated. We have 14+ winter tax that we'll discuss more tonight upstairs that are very restrictive on how we can use that money to fund positions. We also have, I think, built the city budget in unsustainable ways where we've asked residents to pay in the last 3 years 6% more, 6% more, 11% more in my first budget to taxpayers. And as someone who's lived here for 20 years, lives in the old North End, I see so many people getting priced out of this community. And we have to at some point ask the tough questions of what is too much and how do we start right sizing on how much we built out our budget and built out our staffing in particular to make sure it's something that we can afford. So this budget is putting us back on track. It includes this painful decision around layoffs. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And it also includes reduction of certain programs because I'm not looking to put more work on existing and remaining staff because that is also an unfair burden and we will not do that as the city. The last thing I'll say about this budget before I pass it over to Catherine is there are continued investments in this budget that push our priorities forward around community safety and housing in particular. You'll see in this budget continued support of trying to address our chronic community safety issues, continuing efforts related to issues of partnerships with our Howard Center. We do a historic investment in our partnership with Street Outreach. When I was on city council 15 years ago, we basically offered the Howard Center the same amount of money 15 years ago than we were last year, $75,000, considering all the acute mental health issues facing the downtown core of the city at large. I was shocked when I walked in last year seeing that. We are increasing that to $249,000 in this budget because street outreach is a critical component of our community safety response. So upstairs, I'll go into more examples of that, but in terms of housing briefly, the only new position proposed in this budget is a senior advisor on housing strategy because we do not have an adequate strategy right now. To build more adequate housing that's affordable, safe, and abundant, we need to innovate. We need to create a robust strategy, and we need a strategist who's able to do that work to make sure that Burlington is on track for getting anywhere near the housing goals that have been outlined for us by CCRP and the state of Vermont. We will never get out of our housing crisis unless we get real and concrete in that work for the city. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Catherine, who's going to give again a high level. We're going to go into more detail upstairs, but it is at the end of the council meeting upstairs. So I wanted to offer that brief overview. Maybe it wasn't so brief, but now to Catherine.
I will go pretty quickly and save the in-depth review for upstairs. The priorities in building this year's budget, as the mayor spoke about, largely affordability, and we'll talk more about that throughout the presentation. But we balanced that with equity and the sustainability of the general fund budget, so we don't wind up with these large structural gaps. We've demonstrated that through asking department budgets to be held at last year's level, not including any new projects, reviewing the services through the service inventory, and some of those that were deemed non-essential were cut, and reviewing user fees to ensure that those who use those services pay an adequate amount for them. Some of the pressures we have spoken about, the growth of employees without a stable revenue source. We are currently bargaining with our police and fire unions. Those contracts are expiring as of June 30th. And so in those years, it's a unique pressure that we don't know what the cost of living increase will be next year. And so we have to estimate that. We have also heard a lot about the context in which we exist in Vermont with both expensive health insurance as well as health services. The city is not immune from that. We made a pledge not to increase the general tax rate, in large part because of what we asked voters to do with approving the large bonds that they did on town meeting day. We have a confusing and outdated charter, and the mayor referenced the 14+ dedicated taxes that make up what we call the municipal tax. And that certainly adds to the pressure here. And then we are all familiar with what's happening at the federal government level, and that affects us in a few ways: uncertainty around federal grants, and then Canadian tourism, and that affects the gross receipts or the meals and alcohol tax that the city collects, as well as some things like parking and rates at the marina and things like that. This is the big picture update from March, and what we estimated in March is on the left, when we started with an $8 million gap, and at that point we still had about 2.5 million remaining. And the update for today is on the right. And you can see that we have, the good news is that there is no more remaining gap. And how we solved that was 2.6 million of additional revenues. And that comes from 1.7 million of grand list growth. And that is all of the new construction that you see around the city. It is also fully utilizing the voter approved 3 cents of additional police and fire tax that was approved last year. We only charged voters 2 cents of the 3 cents that was approved. So this year we will use all 3 cents, so that additional 1 cent. We are also proposing adding an additional ½ cent each on 2 of those dedicated taxes: parks and highway, which only needs city council approval, not voter approval. And then the last $300,000 of ARPA, which would be split between fire and police to cover salaries. And then lastly, not sunsetting the increase gross receipts rate that was supposed to sunset on June 30th. You will recall that that was a 2% rate on meals, alcohol, admissions, and amusements. The city council increased that to 2.5% for a year, and it is our proposal that we keep that at the 2.5% rate. Moving on to where we have made cuts in the next lines. We had cuts both from ModGov and from the service inventory reductions. You'll note under the ModGov efficiencies, that also includes $750,000 of previously uncollected revenue. And I am not going to spend a lot of time going through all of these. I'm going to go at a pretty high level, but you'll see this provides a little bit of a table of contents for the next slides, where we go into a little more detail first on additional revenues, then on the ModGov efficiencies, and then thirdly on service inventory reductions. Again, I'm going to go really fast down here. I'll take my time upstairs, but I want to make sure there's time for questions from this body before we head upstairs. I spoke a lot about the revenues already. I'm just going to say here that when we spoke to you in March, we were expecting additional revenues on top of this year's, the FY 25 level. Upon further consideration and with the passage of time, we are holding this year's budget level at last year's budget level. And this seems to more accurately reflect the economic predictions and conditions, things we can expect with gross receipts, user fees, even if we keep gross receipts at 2.5%. We have scaled what we expect to receive back because we see less people able to take advantage of that user-based tax. Here we talk a little bit about the history of ModGov and the two main focus areas. It says for FY 26 and it should say for FY 25. This past year was creation of the Department of Finance and Administration and the merging of CETO and BWD. And this slide talks a little bit about what we did and how we are planning to create those savings, and we will plan to come to you in the future with more detailed presentations, both about Department of Finance and Administration and the CETO BWD merger. Service inventory is the third area. All 10 of the 18 departments that the city holds that are general funded and that have public facing services completed this service inventory. And you can see here some of the questions that were answered. And a group evaluated all of those services and took a first look about whether that service was required by charter or ordinance or even a current resolution. And if so, it was deemed essential. If not, that service was reviewed further according to these bullets. And that is how we proceeded with that service inventory process. Here's a little bit more about what was considered. And we are proposing to make some cuts, and the mayor will speak more about them upstairs. That includes the early learning initiative, which was started before the state was providing the funding that they are now for early childhood education. We also had more ARPA money available. We are also ending REIB empowerment grants and the BCA community fund grants. And as we've talked about, the operating of the Old North End Community Center. This is a little bit about the impacted staff. There were 25 positions affected, 7 of them were vacant, 12 union, 13 non-union. And here again I think all or most of the benefits that we provided to impacted staff, to treat them as generously as we could. And again, while we had an obligation under the AFSCME contract to provide these, we didn't for non-union staff. And we made that choice to provide the same benefits to staff, whether they were a member of at the AFSCME bargaining unit or not. You'll hear more from the mayor upstairs about these investments. She spoke a little bit about the housing strategy position and Howard Center. We have worked closely with Chief Burke about, in making sure we include the right number of sworn officers. And we are also leveraging that critical opioid, fund, settlement fund money. This is kind of the proof in the pudding when we say that we are prioritizing affordability. $500,000 is about what the average house is going for in Burlington these days, which, number one, that's not affordable. But that being the case, that's the example that we provide. And you can see, this is just the municipal tax rate, does not include the big chunk that is the education portion, but I don't control that. So this shows that over the past few years, there have been pretty sizable increases. As the mayor said, in FY 23 and 24, that around $200, that's what your 6% increase is. And then in FY 25, that was an 11% increase. And so we're pleased to be presenting at this time a less than 1% increase of $35 per year. And a summary, and then we'll get to questions. We've kept this general fund budget at last year's level while honoring all of the cost of living adjustments and step increases, which is a big deal. The municipal property tax rate is projected to rise at less than 1% to offer some relief to our property taxpayers. We were able to save a large amount through a combination of reducing 25 general fund positions and their associated operating costs. And we are proposing keeping the 2.5% rate for gross receipts while budgeting a reduction of almost $1 million in those gross receipts and our local option tax from this year's rate, based on what we're seeing in actuals.
Before you go off that slide, I just think that people will probably want the combination of the, if we did nothing with the reduction in force, and that $3.9 million would have changed the $35 amount that's on the prior slide for an increase on a $500,000 house to about $325. So much closer to last year's tax increase, which is, again, I just want to give people that baseline plain language understanding of what kind of tax increase we would be looking at if we didn't do this very difficult work of looking at reduction in force. Thank you for letting me answer.
And this is just another look at that summary because it's a lot of information and it can be helpful to see it in this visual format. And then the timeline for the future. Our budget meetings on an individual level, looking at each department, continue every Wednesday. By charter, the mayor must present the budget to City Council by June 15th. By the way the schedule works, we'll do that on June 2nd. And by charter, the City Council must pass that budget by June 30th. June 23rd is the last scheduled City Council meeting, so we'll hope that will happen then. And then, as usual, once June 30th hits, we'll just keep working on next year's budget, and that will include work on modernizing the charter, another budget summit, working with the counselors on a better budget process with more time, as well as continuing to make progress on participatory multi-year budgeting and equitable budgeting. We still have a few minutes for question and answer. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. So we only have about 10 minutes before the council, but we're going to literally repeat ourselves with more detail upstairs, as you all know. So are there any initial comments or questions from the Board of Finance? Councilor Neves.
Might just go back to that slide.
Sure.
I had, so I forgot my third question. I think I got it from that slide, so maybe it'll jog my memory. Could you speak to, we had someone in public wanted to speak about potential impact on retirement? Please clarify if someone's getting to the end of retirement, they get benefits. what impact does that have? Because I know like a lot of folks who work in the state, work in the city, they're doing so not necessarily because we can beat the private sector on salary, but because there's generous benefits. So I wonder if you could provide clarity there. That's my first question. And then the second question was just, which was also raised in public comment, which is a good question or something I think should be clarified is why not, if we have all these grant funded positions or if we have all these temporary positions that we created over the last 10 years, why not sort of look to that as first process? I do think it's clear to me that over the last 10 years, the level of irresponsibility in terms of managing the city's finances is very clear. If I were to run an organization in my professional life, the way we run the city in that way, I would be out of a job. And so I'm very frustrated to be in this position, but we're in this position. So that's what those are my two main questions in terms of how we're navigating a necessary and exercise.
Be very brief in the response, we can go more into detail upstairs. In terms of retirement, I'm gonna speak generically, not to individual employees, situation just out of respect of personnel. Staff are still accruing all retirement all the way up to the end of the 60-day period, and then paid out any sort of accrued leave that one might have. So more senior employee would certainly have, I don't know all the ins and outs of our personnel manual, but sizable amount of sick and vacation leave to be able to be paid beyond those 60 days. We also have a personnel policy that requires official notification related to retirement. So that is something that every employee is aware of. And I'll leave it there in terms of retirement, and that would certainly stand. In terms of new positions, there really aren't that many temporary positions within the city. I think you're speaking to like the 98, if you will, positions. As I mentioned before in my very fast overview, there's all sorts of positions that were included in that 98 figure. There was a sizable growth within the Parks Department in particular, but also, as I mentioned, it was the growth of CSO positions that did not exist 10 years ago. CSL did not exist 10 years ago, but how they were built and how they were structured 5-6 years ago was supposed to be a reallocation of money used for officers. And the city decided that we wanted to staff back up officers. So what do you do with the difference there? Do you still need them or not? These are just questions here. Similarly with RAB started with 19, all one-time funding, and I consciously put 5 FTEs for RAB because I think both the community safety positions I mentioned before and RAB are critical work that we do now. Part of running a modern city is also updating what we assess things as in terms of core services and necessary work the city does, and looking at other things that maybe we let go of, even if it's been here for 40 years. It's a very important and nuanced understanding, I think, how to responsibly lead a city forward, and that's the lens through which we looked at all the positions. Other questions or comments? So Travis.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're running short on time. I'm also mindful of the fact that in the council meeting, this is on deliberative, and I won't have an opportunity to weigh in then, so I'll use this space now. First of all, I want to respectfully take strong exception to characterization just made by one of my colleagues here that the actions with respect to the budget over the last few years were in any way irresponsible. Let's not forget what this country and what this community and what the state went through over the past years with respect to the pandemic, with respect to the long needed reckoning with racial justice following the murder of George Floyd. Many of these positions were stood up at a time when our community, perhaps more than any time in the city's history, was dependent on our local government to make it through perhaps the most difficult time in this city's last century. The civilian positions that were stood up at the police department were a direct result of filling a void that was left with our cutting back on sworn officer positions and meeting the public safety needs of this community. What would have been irresponsible was this city not, during that time of great need, standing up a budget and departments with positions that were responsive to our community and the times. Of course, now, we are addressing the fallout of that. To that end, Burlington is not alone. communities around the state, around this country are now having to level set budgets and level set and right-size workforces that grew with a lot of outside support that municipalities had never faced before. And on that point, Mayor, I want to start by giving you some grace here. I know that you're presented with incredibly difficult decisions, like some of the folks in public comment mentioned, given the size of our workforce in terms of its comparison to the rest of the city budget. I think we've known for some time now that this budget was going to have to involve some really unfortunate and difficult cuts to the workforce. And so I want to begin by acknowledging that and understanding that you've been in an incredibly difficult place in having to make some very difficult decisions here. I also need to be clear with the public, however, that a special executive session meeting called by the mayor 1 week ago was the first time that the council learned about the scope of or any specifics of the personnel decisions that are related to this budget. Because the information was relayed confidentially, without an opportunity to take copies of the information we were provided, and without additional specifics on the budget, it has been all but impossible for the council to provide full feedback on personnel decisions. And I need to take an opportunity to express that I'm disappointed that the council is in this position. I'm disappointed that we're in this position after a number of these position eliminations have already been relayed to staff. It is an overarching concern that I have around the information or the slowness in providing information to the Board of Finance and Council regarding the FY26 budget. Even the materials today, which remain in high-level summary form and lack the specifics necessary for us to make informed decisions, weren't posted to our agenda until this afternoon. And I'm left wondering why. Slide 12 of the presentation with respect to the $1 million in strategic cuts mentions that these cuts, like no longer picking up Christmas trees and ending senior programming at the O&E Core Center, that those decisions were made in March, 2 months ago. And I'm left asking myself why this board and the council was not given any direction at that point in time that the administration had made those plans and had identified those services for potential cuts, which obviously would have given us significantly more opportunity for us to provide feedback. I also need to relay that over the weekend, I did hear directly from a number of city staff impacted by these personnel decisions. And one question they've been asking, it's a question I've been asking myself, is the administration's position on whether or not it had the authority to inform staff of layoffs when the council had not yet taken action. In the past, I believe the council has been required to effectuate both the creation and the elimination of positions. For this reason, I would have preferred that the administration not actually lay off employees this past week, and some of them, be shown the door, but rather, albeit still difficult to hear, to have provided notice that the administration was presenting a budget that proposed the elimination of these positions, but that budget would ultimately be subject to council action. At this point, given that some folks are no longer here, what happens now to impacted employees if the council chose to not follow through on the administration's proposed position eliminations? Are those folks expected to come back? Will they want to come back? And what does it mean for any other roles that may still be impacted by the budget process? I also want to echo a comment that was made by Councilor Newbeezer, which is, given everything that we've heard with respect to 37 positions created with one-time funding, or now that the 98 FTEs over the last 9 years, I admittedly anticipated a good number of eliminated positions would have come from either one of those lists. Certainly the 37 positions created with one-time funding. We heard from Melissa Kate from Parks tonight that there's a century's worth of experience among Parks employees subject to layoff. I believe, looking at the personnel list, that there's another century's worth of experience among laid off staff at CEDO. And I admit that that's not sitting well with me, and I'm going to continue to have some follow-up questions on it. I don't want to take up too much time here, but I do want to sort of finally say that I have a couple more substantive concerns around the administration's proposed position eliminations. My main concern is whether or not existing staff is going to have the bandwidth to take on all the services performed by those subject to layoff. For example, a number of positions are listed as having grant, finance, and accounting functions that are going to fall to existing staff in the clerk treasurer's office, which does a ton. And they do a lot of great work. But I'm wondering, are they going to be able to take on everything that was done by those individuals? With respect to positions eliminated from BPD, there's an indication that those services are going to be tasked to sworn officers who we know are already overworked, and are they going to be able to continue that work? With respect to the Parks Department, there are positions being eliminated with respect to our recreation program in particular, and is our remaining staff going to be able to do it all? And what services are ultimately going to be sacrificed here if the remaining staff are not able to pick up everything that the great folks who have done a lot of great things for the city have done here in recent years and decades? Again, we are just learning a great deal of information here now with respect to the budget. I think as we now move into budget season and these Board of Finance meetings over this month, I think there's going to be a number of additional questions regarding the budget. I take some exception, for example, to the indication that the city has lacked innovation in the housing space. I think the neighborhood code, for example, and the projects that are ongoing at Cambrian Rise and Burlington Town Center and the South End Innovation District, innovation is in the name, is a sign that we've done a great deal of innovation in the housing space in recent years. And I do have questions that I'll respectfully be asking about whether or not we really need to be pivoting in such a different direction to do that work. I'll respectfully have some questions around the CEDO and business and workforce development merger to make sure that any merger along those lines both ensures that our business community retains the specific supports that they found from the business and workforce development department, as well as ensuring that the merger of those departments does not in any way dilute CEDO's foundational mission, which has served such an important value in this community for a number of decades now. I've gone on at length well over the 5 minutes that we've gotten in council, so I appreciate that and know we need to get upstairs. I do want to again say, Mayor, that I know that this is a difficult process, but I think it's also important that I state my concerns as I've, many of which I've related to already about where we are right now. And I'll look forward to working with you and the administration as we work through this budget in the next weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Travers. And I appreciate you shared this morning a lot of these questions to me for the first time in terms of the details of the questions, just in terms of also talking about process and feedback. I want to just touch on a few different things, considering that public comment upstairs is about 6:30. A few different things in terms of the process. I have articulated, including at a press conference this morning, that our process is less than ideal. I thought of this when I was a city councilor 15 years ago. Our process per charter, which is outdated, does not respect and reflect the fact that we have a modern day city to run. A mayor is not required even to present a budget until June 15th, which is ridiculous in modern day world. We have followed a similar timeline of presenting information and updates to council than the prior administration. And this year was a much harder year to put together all the details to make sure we did it responsibly, that we did not reveal and stress out staff when we were not sure exactly where cuts would be, that we had time to work with the union and to make sure that folks were prepared for such difficult discussions with staff. I also mentioned earlier that we have no RIF policy even written down. This is the type of stuff that, again, diving into the details and making sure that there is process and procedures and that we do better as a city to make sure that this stuff exists so we have better process is the work ahead and the work that I'm committed to do. And when it comes to budgeting and making sure that the legislative branch, which I sat on not too long ago, including in the legislature, has time for it to do its own deliberative process. Even if I gave this to you 2 months ago, it would be not in a lot of time to dive into a complex organization with the kinds of work that we do. We did provide to the city council the entire service inventory, which is a multi-page document with tons of information in there on every program and service that we do and what we looked at in our assessment, and including whether it's required by charter, by ordinance, by city council resolution, etc. It also takes time to build this budget. We've been diligently at work at this since November and December. We never really stopped working on the budget last year. because there was so much work to do. And when we were using the service inventory, that is another new tool that this city has never used before. It is not used as scalpel. It is used much more of a blunt instrument when saying just fund at last year's budget. So we got to work and we dived deep, and in terms of using the service inventory, it took more time to make sure we were trying to get this right. And I made initial suggestions about like where I saw $1 million worth of cuts. We went back to departments to talk about that with departments to create some better and stronger process to say, is this the right thing? Where else should we be considering it? What else do we need to know? And then more ideas emerged from there with department heads. So this was a multi-month process to even get to you to the proposals we have here today. And it's a lot of diligent work, not only from my office, but department heads and folks that they relied on as well. In terms of the authority of the mayor to take this action, City Attorney Brown provided this answer to City Council last Wednesday in a memo we followed up with Council about after that executive session to speak to the way the charter interprets this at now. And certainly upstairs, I'll ask the City Attorney to address that question. I don't want to duplicate. I'm sure that will come up tonight. But also in terms of how we notice employees, we also hold the challenge of making sure we protect the larger organization and institution of the city. It is not a easy thing to do to figure out how to notice employees and how to have a respectful process, but one that also limits our liabilities and protections for this. In terms of just the worry of the impact of work on employees, I hold that same concern. And that is why we're right-sizing the work, and that is the next piece of the work to make sure that we're looking at true reduction of programs and services, and there's clarity within departments. That has not been the culture of the city. The culture of the city is keep doing more and put it more on the backs of workers, and we will not be doing that within this work. And so we need to we are getting to work on that as we merge financial work, as we look at assessments that our chief of police offered in terms of the reductions in force within the DPD. And how he thought it was more appropriate based on expertise for officers to be doing certain work that was being done by staff who are not sworn officers. And then finally, just on CEDO and BWD, we're holding much more information on that on Wednesday. We'll hold another press conference around what's coming next in that particular department. We're re-merging two departments that were essentially taken apart under the prior administration, and we'll be sharing a lot more information about that, how it impacts housing, and what's to come. And after this press conference, we will find time to come to council for work sessions. We can answer questions in detail about how we're going to make CEDO a much more central, empowered, and vibrant department that is really able to meet its full chartered mission. That is exactly why we're doing a merger of those two departments. Other comments or questions? We are at 6:09 p.m. Councilor Neuser, before I go to a second pass, which I think you actually asked questions already on this topic. I think I saw Councilor Carpenter's hand up. I'm sorry, I just remembered that. Sarah, would you like to ask?
Well, just if I would be curious if you and I know affordability is top of our minds, but in this particular scenario, where would you raise revenue if we needed to?
Well, we are raising revenue in this proposed budget.
Yes, you are, beyond what you proposed.
So I think it's important. This is not a zeroed out budget. We still have revenue that we need to raise.
Yes.
So we're raising revenue on the 1 cent for the public safety tax, the highway tax, as you know. In terms of other ways to raise revenue, this is why we have to do a deep dive into our charter to really look at the 14+ splinter taxes and really ask the question, do they still serve the city of Burlington as they are structured? Some councilors know there's my favorite memo that exists within the city of Burlington is a 100-year-old memo, a memo that looks at 100 years of tax policy that really shows how frankly convoluted that's been built over the years and how it's actually led to some different interpretations of how we raise revenue for the city. I think we could streamline it. We could make it a lot more clear to taxpayers. And I think we can also make it more responsive to our modern day needs of how difficult it is to budget and how we don't want to constrain the hands of future mayors and councilors trying to make sure we have a fair way to raise revenue. The other piece of that is, I've convened a tax fairness working group for which 2 councilors sit on. And I'm really hopeful that their recommendations, which are due back at the end of June or so, will also give us a bit of a roadmap of recommendations to look at tax policy and look at fairer ways for us to raise revenue. Because right now, on our municipal side of the property tax bill, there is no income sensitivity, unlike on the state side. And that is, for me, until we change that inequitable structure within our tax structure, I will be very careful about any tax increases I propose because it has a disproportionate impact, negative impact on fixed income individuals and working families.
I appreciate all that, Mayor, but I just trying to ask for my own information today, since we didn't ask for a general tax increase. Where would you look for revenue today, not next year? And you don't have to answer that this minute, but part of President Travers' comments is, how do we balance? I am not at all proposing that we raise revenue, but I just need to understand that. We've got to make cuts. And so the question is, if we don't want to cut it here, where do we cut it? And if we don't want to cut it at all, then it's a revenue raising exercise. And so I'm just really trying to understand, is there revenue possibilities? We probably don't choose to want to take them. And like I said, I don't need to have you answer that this minute, but I just would be curious, are there revenue raising opportunities?
There are a small number of those filter tax where council could vote to increase them higher than I proposed in my budget. But I chose not to increase them beyond, this is the highway tax and parks tax, because I did not think that doing so was an affordable, would lead to an affordable city. So those are the ones you can look at in particular. I think there might be a third, but highway and parks counts.
Okay, thank you.
Council Barlow?
Just that I share many of the concerns that Councilor Travers expressed so eloquently. And I'm still, I feel like I'm playing catch up on a lot of these things. I've been asking for the service inventory since it was available, and I understand there was sensitivity about sharing it. But certainly there's other content that is sensitive that is shared with the council in executive session. And even if it were shared with us earlier, it would be helpful. It would have been helpful to us to ask informed questions that may or may not have helped the administration shape some of the decisions that were made about where to cut, where to raise revenue, et cetera. And so I feel like I'm still catching up. I have a number of questions. I have some, but rather than make this meeting run long, since we'll have the opportunity upstairs, I'll ask some of them there. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Council Barlow. Again, noting that we will have a repeat of the show upstairs. Councilor Beezer, do you want to hold the question till upstairs?
All right, fair enough.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So we will, I'm going to close this item. There's no action asked for on this item. It's a presentation. We'll be again having it upstairs. And if there is no further comments, we are at the end of our agenda, and I will adjourn the Board of Finance at 6:15 p.m.